Okay, I just had to help the missus get the car started. Right, so I can't remember where I was now. Yes, all right. So we're doing the fret leveling thing. So fret leveling is something you can do yourself. It's not as extreme or drastic as it sounds, but it's you just need to know a few things to get it done right. And every time I do it on a guitar, I guess what I do on the video is to show you how to do it, because the whole purpose of buying these guitars and giving them some love and attention, adding some love and affection to these poor unloved black Squier Stratocasters, is to not just make them play better than they currently do, but it's also to do it and give you a bit of insight into how it works, or at least as much as I know about it, and so you can do it yourself in future. You don't have to either be playing crappy sounding guitars, or you don't have to spend 60 quid or something to go and get someone else to do it for you. So fret leveling can be done either a high-tech-ish sort of way, which you might buy some equipment like a fret file like I've got here, or a fret rocker. But as the guy I was telling you about, Chinese Guitar Skeptic, a chap online YouTube channel who buys and sells or buys Chinese guitars, he showed a great video where he just got a block of something like a 9-volt battery he used and just wrapped a piece of sandpaper around it and took the necessary height off the fret that way. So you can do it with low-tech methods, and you don't need even to buy this piece of metal, which costs, I don't know, something like 15 quid if you buy it from the guitar suppliers. When in fact it's just a piece of, well, cut steel with a nice straight edge. But you can use a credit card, which does the same thing. All you need to do with a fret rocker is you just need to place whichever edge of the fret rocker covers 3 frets at a time, no more than 3. You don't want it covering 4 or 2, you can't do it. The idea is to detect whether one fret is higher than the ones either side of it. And you'll hear this if I get up close. Maybe you can listen closely. Let's find a bit. So that little clickety noise is me rocking the fret rocker backwards and forwards over this middle fret. So obviously I can't check fret number 1 because there's nothing to go either side. You've only got the nut on the other side of it. You can check fret number 2 because you've got a fret either side, and what you could hear right there is there is some extra height at that point. Now when you find a high spot on the fret, it doesn't go all the way. Often it doesn't go all the way across the fret. Sometimes it's only in a single point. Now some people think it's a good idea to take a little rubbery hammer of some kind and bang the frets in a bit more. Could be. I'm not a great fan. I don't like the idea of hitting something that is already seated perfectly stable in its little glued slot. So I don't like the idea of hitting it with a hammer. I'd rather take off the extra and leave the frets seated. Now I'm just looking at these, I don't know, you won't be able to see it in this, but I'm looking at these frets and I can see some scratches in these frets, like somebody's done a bit of a fret job before, but hasn't taken the time to polish it. That would have an effect on your strings. It would be hard to bend them. You feel a kind of grindy feeling. But anyway, so just checking back on this guitar, the idea is you go up, if you're doing this and you were doing it not using one of these, because this does great chunks of it at one time, but if you're doing it with the spot application, a bit of sandpaper in your block or your 9-volt battery, then what you'd want to do is you'd want to check the fret, and where you hear the rocking, you want to mark with your dry permanent marker. You want to mark the part of the fret which is high. So it's the middle fret is always the high one if it's making a clicking sound. And what I've done there is, it's not the best pen I've got here, but at least it's slightly permanent. And I mark it on the guitar, on the fret, so you can actually see. And then what I also do is I put a mark either side of it on the masking tape, because by the time you've used your sandpaper to take that little high bit off the fret, what will happen is you'll have lost the permanent marker, so you won't know where you had the problem, because you need to do a second part of the operation, which is reshaping the top of the fret where you've flattened it off. So by taking away the high part, you reduce the height, but you also give it a flat top. Excuse me a minute. Let's make a lot of noise while we can. Yeah, so when you remove the high spot, you lower the metal, but you also give it a square edge, which you need to then round off in a separate operation. So the first pass is to check with your flat edge and go across. See, there you go, it's quite a high bit there. Now I'm not going to do it bit by bit here, but if you were doing it low tech bit by bit, you'd be marking each fret, and you'd mark up the extent of the fret where the rocking problem occurs. And what you'd end up with is a series of markers on your neck showing the high points of the frets. And then what you'd do is you'd take your square edge, your 9-volt battery, and something like I use 320 paper for this. You take your square edge, wrap your sandpaper around it, and then literally, very gently, take off a couple of little pushes backwards and forwards just on the spot that has the high metal. And then after you've done 2 or 3 rubs, just check that again. Still got it there, so I'll take off a little bit more. 2, 3, 4, 5, not too much. We've still got some there. So I keep going very gently until I've reduced that clicking. Still there, so I'll take a bit more off. Anyway, I'm going to do the whole thing with a different tool, but if you were doing it the low-tech way, you would do that for every spot that you've marked up and down the neck. And then we'll come back later to do the fret crowning part of it, which is where you shape the top of the fret. So I'm going to do a fast, speeded up version, which is to buy a nice tool like this, the fret leveling file. It's about 25 quid or something from Crimson Guitars, this one, but a few places have them. And I'm going to use this all the way up the neck of the guitar, and I'll stand up to do this because I want to get a smooth run. And what's good about this is this gives me a if I press it down, even that's clicking. So if I don't want to press too hard, but I'm going to keep a fairly flat, a fairly firm hand on it, and I'm going to just run up the whole length of the guitar in stripes. Okay, it sounds quite extreme because it is. It's taking quite a lot of material off, and you can see when you look down on it, you can see where it's doing that. Now, the good thing about this is it does it all evenly. And leaves you, if you do it right, with a guitar that hopefully, do a little test, we should find, get the right length piece, we should find that we're not getting any clicking noises. That one? No. Thought it was for a second. Okay, so as you can see, this is quite a drastic way of doing it. Now I've got a little bit left here because it's hard to get to this first fret, so I'm going to do this one manually. It's quite difficult. It's a nice one, saves you a lot of time, but it doesn't often get to the very first one in the sequence, so you might end up having to do the first fret manually. And again, I'm just going to be very careful to make sure that I'm going to iron out any rocking on that first fret, because I don't want to do everything else and then not get the first fret right. almost right, just a slight hot spot there. Again, still going to work away at this little spot. So beyond that, I've got most of the rest of the neck done in one great swoop. Tiny bit left there now. It won't take long to do. This is something you have to take your time doing. There's no shortcut. There are some more expensive pieces of kit you can buy. There's a thing called I think it's a radius file, which is it's like a curved piece of wood that fits over the guitar like that, and you stick tape, wrap it to the inside of the curve, and then you do the whole thing. It's like a baguette or something running up and down the neck, and it does the frets to exactly the right radius, which is the amount of curvature you need. That probably is a quicker way of doing it, actually, but it's also slightly expensive. I think they're about 60 quid each, those radius. And of course you've got to get one for each kind of guitar you're doing this to. It's all very well if you're just doing Squier Strats all the time, because they all have the same, I think they all have the same neck radius, but not so great if you are doing other kinds of guitars. So I'm just doing a quick check in different places, and I would hope, after having done there's a little bit left there. No, I'm imagining it. I would hope after giving a good work over with the fret leveling file, that everything would be in pretty good order, and I'm fairly confident it will do that, but I'm just whizzing up and down to make sure we've got no rocking bits left over. And the reason this little device has 4 different length sides on it, and you could make the same by cutting your credit card to have 4 different length edges, but the reason it has is so that you can end up doing it at this top end here. Now I've got a little bit, tiny bit left over, actually not more than a tiny bit, got a fair bit left over. I'm going to just run down the middle of this one from this point, and I trust that'll take care of that. Pretty much, yeah. Now when you're doing this, be warned that you've just made a load of little iron filings. So let's imagine you spent a lot of time doing that with your 9-volt battery and your piece of sanding paper. Remember, 320 grit is more than strong enough. Any tougher than that, and you could be taking off too much metal too quickly. And once you've taken too much off, you're going to have to take everything else off as well to match it. So you can do a lot of damage this way, and if you really screw it up, you could end up having to have a refile, new frets, refret. So do it always very gently, and you can't go wrong if you do it very gently and you check with your fret rocker each time. You can't go wrong. You'll know once you're down to, you've got the thing down right, you'll not hear any rocking. Okay, so let's imagine you've done that. I cheated, did it a bit quicker, a bit more ravenously. But then what you need to do is and I'm going to cut the video at this point because we could be here forever, but you need to take your permanent marker and you need to take enough time to mark some black marker pen on the top of every single fret, and you want to cover every single fret. Now the reason you're going to do this, and I'll talk while I do it, but I'll cut the camera in a minute, cut the video, because this will take quite a while to do. So you're going to put marker pen on every single fret, all right? And the reason you're going to do this is because the next stage is we need to reshape these frets, because right now we've got them the right height, but to do that we've scraped the round bit off the top. And in a sense what we've really got to do is we've got to put back a round shape. But we've got to do it without cutting down any more of the height, because if we were to make it round and take some more of the height, then we've messed up the leveling part of it. So what we're aiming to do with this next part is to shape the remaining fret. So you've mentioned you've got a square bit where we've chopped it off and then a round bit on the edges. We're going to shape those edges so that they meet at the top and make a pretty much a little hump, you know, an arch, a round shape, smooth round shaped fret is what we're after. So what we're going to do, now there are some files by the way you can buy to do this, and those files cost about, well, the diamond edged ones or the diamond coated ones, which are the effective ones, they cost about 60-70 quid. And they're like a file where the edge of the file is concave, which means you go over the top of the fret and it cuts it down to the right profile. The problem with that is A, they're very expensive, and B, you can't see what you're doing, and C, actually you're more than likely to take some height off the top of the fret again, because you can't see, the fret is going to be underneath what you're pressing down with this file. You can't see the fret while you're doing it. So the danger with that method is you're going to pay a lot of money, and you're also going to then reduce the height of the fret as you do the job, which is exactly what you don't want to do. So I recommend the old-fashioned way, which is you get a three-sided file. This is only, it's not a diamond one, this is just a metal one. It will clog and wear out eventually, but it's only 10 quid or something. You get a three-cornered file with one of the corners has been rounded off and smooth, so you can run that corner against your masking tape on your fretboard without doing any harm. And basically, with that touching the fretboard, you're going to go up against the side of the fret on either side, and you're going to just take away enough metal to leave to smooth off the rounded, smooth off the squared edge of the fret that you've just leveled, and you're going to leave a nice crown on top of it untouched, not lowered anymore. And you might have worked this out by now. How are you going to know that you've done it? Because you will leave a tiny thin line of black marker pen on top of the fret, and you'll do that by eye. And you need good light, and you need good reading glasses, like if you're like my age. But what you'll do is you'll file gently in a straight line up and down the sides of the fret, and stop when you've got just a thin black line running right down the center top of the fret, and that means you're leaving a tiny bit of the fret untouched. But that means you haven't taken any more height off it, and that's the real challenge, is to round the edges without taking any more height. So if you end up with a set of 22 frets, each one with a tiny thin strip of black marker right down the middle of it, then you've successfully reshaped your frets, or re-crowned them, as they say in the business. So I'm going to take some time doing this, so I'm just going to stop the video. I think I'm going to stop the video.